All right. Happy Purim, everyone. What I want to share with you is something I've been thinking about for a while, but in particular in the current moment. Um, um, really looking at, even though we call it the scroll of Esther, that Esther really is the most important character in the book. She is the glue that kind of holds the story together, and she is the hero, even though Mordecai, blah, blah, blah. But I want to point out the path at Esther's journey that she is also the only person in the book who actually has a character journey. Achashverosh starts the book as a dumb king who gets led around by his leaders and his wife, ends the book as a dumb king who gets led around by his advisors and his wife. Mordecai, generic leading man, generic leading man. Haman, well, he ends up a little bit shorter by the end of the book, but that's a different story. But Esther is actually goes through this journey of figuring out who she is and figuring out how to be an advocate, how to stand up. And look, we are at a moment in history. Well, I'll tell you this. The word unprecedented gets thrown around way too often because, in fact, most things are precedented, right? So, oh my God, there's a worldwide plague. That hasn't happened before except in 1918 and about every century before that. Like, oh my God, people hate Jews. That has never happened before. But I think we live in a time where it is sort of harder to navigate what is our place. Speak up for ourselves, right? So some of the people who you might have thought were on your side are now your enemies. Some of the people who in theory you didn't like are apparently your best friends. How does this all, it's a very topsy-turvy world. And Esther really goes on a journey, I would tell you, of understanding her role and how she can, and I would even go further, say must, stand up for herself. So I am going to, and I'll put this up on the screen for those who care about this sort of thing, who may be watching at home. And so on your handout, we're going to look at step 1. And I was going to do this if Chavruta would break into small groups, but I feel like you guys don't have the energy for that. So we're going to do it together. But I am going to ask you guys to actually not just make me do all the talking. And so it's a very familiar story. In fact, you just heard it about 40 minutes ago. But we're going to look at phase 1, which is Esther Underground. So would someone be willing to read step 1? Thank you.
King gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther. But Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had instructed her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding, as she had done when she was under his tutelage.
Okay. So what do you make of this? Why did Mordecai not want Esther to reveal that she was Jewish? It wasn't the right time. Okay, say more. There was some anti-Semitism in ancient Iran, right? That's definitely an area of concern. Okay, so I don't know. Has anyone here ever been in a situation where you decided, not to let people to hide the fact that you were Jewish? Um, Let's hear it. I would love to hear examples. Go ahead. Right? Right. When I'm traveling, depending on where I'm going, I might wear a baseball cap or a hat. Certainly in a lot of parts of Europe. About 7 years ago, I was on a trip visiting towns in the West Bank. And I say not Judea and Samaria, but the West Bank, because this was the West Bank. And, I was staying overnight in a house on the outskirts of Bethlehem. There was no room at the inn or something like that, but staying with a Palestinian family. And obviously they knew that I was Jewish from America, but best to not alert the neighbors. So, definitely times. So level 0, if you will, is Esther not revealing her kindred to her people. Like, it's not about me. I am out, right? Like, I'm not a part of this. So now we're going to look at step 2. And so I was wondering maybe if someone would read for us. Yes. Well, by the way, that hasn't happened yet. Haman only shows up in chapter 3. In chapter 2, Esther is becoming the queen, and Haman is not on the scene yet at all. So, I mean, because we've read the Megillah before, we know chapter 3 is coming, right? Chapter 11 may also be coming, but that's a whole other story, right? But Mordecai, this is before there's any visible threat. Now, by the way, the other thing is when the king is doing his reality show, beauty contest, bringing all of the brides together, right? This is like the Persian version of The Bachelor. He actually very intentionally brings women from every nationality, right? It's not just, the most beautiful women in Shushan, but the idea is he wants, by bringing a woman of every nationality into his harem, he now has a connection, right? The Uzbeks and the Kuthians and the Egyptians, right? Every nation that is under control of the Persian Empire can now say, oh, well, our daughter is the wife of the king. Yes, one of 127 of them. But it's a clever political move. And so the question is, right, was she Miss Judea, right? Was she, and it seems like no, right? But it is a very diverse population that's brought together. So now we have step 2. So Esther, before, when Mordecai said, don't tell anyone you're Jewish, she's like, great, no problem. Let's look at step 2. Haman has now come out with the plot. We're already in chapter 4. Would someone read about Esther and her little dialogue with Mordecai, and let's see what we have to say about that. Go ahead. Anyone? No? Thank you. Go ahead.
So have that, take that to Mordecai the following report. All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in any court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, and that he be put to death.
Ooh, that's harsh.
Thank you, but now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days.
So basically, Mordecai's like, you've got to go to plead for the Jews. And she says, I'm not invited, right? And more than that, right? It's dangerous, right? It's not just, oh, I'm washing my hair, I don't want to, right? But it is dangerous to stand up and express an opinion, right? So they say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Sometimes the squeaky wheel gets replaced, right? Or, similarly, you put something out on social media, the world decides to pile on you, which is why I never read the comments. I just post it and forget that I posted it. But but it is standing up for something is dangerous, right? The people who don't like what you said, right? Your side is out of favor. The other side can come after you. So let's keep going. When Mordecai was told what Esther said,
that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace.
okay,
If you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to your position for just such a crisis.
Keep going.
And then set it back
Mm-hmm.
night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law and violent to perish, I shall perish.
Well, there you go. So how might Esther's concerns parallel concerns we might have today about speaking up about something? Is anyone going to kill you if you go to the king and he has not called on you in 30 days? Is that an issue anyone has ever had? Sorry? They might fire you, right? So which is almost as bad as being killed, right? Right? Any, is there any other way that you can think of situations today that might be parallel? Yes.
Right now, I just feel so frustrated.
Right. So, and by the way, and look, we are a very diverse congregation politically and otherwise. But, one of the things that all Jews have in common is saying, I can't believe that a Jew would say that, right? I can't believe that you are allying yourself with our natural enemies by taking that stand that you're taking. And you can sub in whichever side in general, whenever I say things like, people are like, well, why did you take that side? I took no side. You took a side, right? But I think we can all think of despicable people, right, who happen to be saying that they represent the best interests of the Jews at the moment in one way or another, right? So if we don't speak up, someone is going to speak up and say, well, as a Jew, I believe that, right? And it's a hard thing, right? That's not necessarily how this would go. So Esther doesn't want to go to the king. Let me ask a follow-up question. So who are the Mordecais of today? Who, if in this story, right, today, who are the people who are saying, you go do something? Social media influencers, right? I mean, look, they're at least raising their hand, right? But rabbis, right, have opinions apparently sometimes, right? Right? Let me ask you a follow-up question, which is, why go to the king? Is there anyone else Mordecai and Esther might have spoken to? God, right? Let's start there. So now look, they are fasting, right? So it's interesting that they're not actually, the word for prayer, tefillah, is not used. It seems like they never actually explicitly pray to God in the Megillah, right? They appeal to the king. Now, fasting in ancient times was a form of prayer or beseeching God. So, for example, when Jonah comes and tells the people of Nineveh, you're going to be destroyed, they declare a fast. So fasting in the ancient world was, in some sense, a form of prayer. It was a non-verbal. Now, we have, in the conventional calendar, we have, 5 or 6 really real fast days. Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, the 3 minor fasts, Esther, and then there's some others like the firstborn, which is observed mainly in the breach, right? But in general, fasting in our circles is basically something you do to lose weight, not because you want God, unless I guess you want God, I guess you would do that. There are some times in some circles in Judaism where fasts, so there's actually a period called Shovavim, where there are people who for 6 weeks actually engage in regular fasting, period that just ended, as a form of prayer to God, spirituality, etc. I heard that you're raising your hand, but I can't. Yes.
Is he supposed to be representing the word of God? Is he confident? This is the life he did reflect on the reason going to happen from somewhere. How does he know that? And if you don't participate, your is going to be killed.
So Mordecai, Mordecai seems to have a pretty strong opinion of what's going to happen. So the book says nothing of the sort, right? Mordecai is a member of the royal court giving lobbying advice, right? Now, look, by the way, I can reread this. So there are discussions in the Midrashim, that Mordecai was a prophet or whatever, but like those are not the plain sense of the book by a long shot, right? Mordecai, right? Usually when someone is a prophet, it will say, God spoke to God spoke to Moses, God spoke to Jeremiah, God spoke to Ezekiel, right? They say, God spoke to me saying, if God had spoken to Mordecai, you would have thought he would have thrown that in, right? When Esther says no, instead of saying, no, really, I think you should, that would have been the time to put in God said so, right? So he is writing, I think, look, perhaps with wisdom, but I think prophecy is a little bit iffy. Now, the other thing is that there was a belief that in general, you could only be a prophet if you lived in the land of Israel, which Mordecai did not. But nevertheless, so the answer is, I think Mordecai here is really speaking, like there's the book doesn't tell us that Mordecai is engaging in prophecy. The book tells us Mordecai is basically laying it on heavy to Esther, like don't think that you're going to be safe. All right, I think we're ready to go to level 3. The book does not tell us, right? We know that she has been about 5 years when this comes around. Here, if we look at, let me make sure I'm doing this. What makes you think she's had a child? When? Nope. To who? Well, not yet, or it would have come up, right? So the is chosen as the queen. Go. Let me make sure I'm giving you the right chronology here. If you look at chapter, he only wanted, right. She was a virgin when she came to him, apparently. Now, the rabbis have a debate about that, but we'll just leave that be for a moment. So what we know is that this beauty pageant happens sometime after he chases out Vashti. We don't know when it is. We know that the edict, here we go, happens in the 12th year of King Achashverosh. But we don't know how long Esther was queen before that. So, right. Oh, there we go. I was looking for that. So it's 5 years, right? So it's 5 years that she's been the queen, but we don't know. Was she 19? Was she 28? Was she 12? I mean, who knows, right? Was she 59? Nobody knows. Wait, the text only tells us that she has been the queen for 5 years. And that's all we know. All right, so let's look at what happens in phase 3. Would somebody be willing to read how Esther plays out this next phase? Thank you. Yep. Freud could have fun with that, but we're going to let it be. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So what at all of the angst, the storm and drang that she's going to go before the king, and what does she ask the king for? Come to a feast, right? Okay. She invites the king and Haman to a feast. Why does she not disclose, like, why not come out with, right? How close is she to following Mordecai's command, right? If your desire is to end the destruction of the people, right? Why not sort of bearing the lead, as we say, right? Right? Not, please don't destroy my people, but let's have a party and invite the guy who's looking to do it. Why? She's savvy. How so? Okay. Okay. So being a man myself, I don't understand what you mean. So tell me more. What's smart about inviting him to a party? Okay, so the best way to get to a man's heart is through his stomach, right? Maybe she wants a more intimate environment. Mm-hmm. Right. It's a drinking part. Right. So Les, it's a drinking party, and it looks like there's only 3 people invited. Right. So
And she's inviting Haman too? What's going on here? My house is meeting with-
so basically, is she inviting Haman to make the king jealous? Right. So look, there are a couple of ways we can interpret this. One is that she is playing like 4-dimensional chess because she's going to get the king jealous of Haman, right? This is a whole plot and a whole plan. A less sophisticated view, like you right away. Like first sort of schmooze them up, right? Like, if I am, sometimes if you're doing fundraising, sometimes you just call someone on the phone and say, hey, can I have $1 million? Like, hey, can we go out to coffee? And then once you're at the coffee, then like there's sort of a protocol of, developing a relationship, like having the meeting to discuss the thing, not just walking in with your demand, right? Is sort of a social thing. Or the other thing, okay, right? So this gets back to, right, that she's building Haman up to knock him down. But we don't know that yet, right? Like it's also possible, right, that she is just, she did the assignment, but only a little bit, right? So she raised her hand, but she didn't say anything, right? There are plenty of times when someone will make a statement we are very concerned about, but you won't actually condemn, right? Or you won't actually, say a thing. You just, sort of it's a non-statement statement.
Get the husband to do something, it's a problem, maybe he's too old.
All right.
He's assassinated, Esther has assassinated the plot that originated in the harem. So she's got him now at a party with her and the harem and the number 2 guy. It occurred to him that he might bump him off.
All right. So look, Achashverosh, right? His eunuchs came up against him, although it's not clear if those were also eunuchs from the harem or not, because there was a lot of eunuchs running around. They didn't use Windows back then. Sorry. Like 4 of you understood that. That's fine. But they there were the issue is there were a lot of saris means a eunuch in Hebrew, but I mean there are a lot of sarisim running around.
Yeah, he's closeted now with her and the number 2 guy.
Right. Either way, right. I mean, look, and this gets back to this would be that Esther is being really clever and she's setting up the jealousy, right? That's what we said, right? That's sort of the take your pick, right? Now, by the way, if he is afraid, he doesn't have to go to lunch, right? I mean, that's, like, look, he can just say, it's good to be the king, right? Look, he can say to Esther, he could say to Esther, no thanks, I want you all to myself. Or actually, I've decided to lower my scepter and I'll run another beauty pageant, right? So I think the question of Achashverosh being afraid, I mean, look, you can read anything into the story you want. I think if fear of assassination was the issue, then just don't have the party, right? So like the issue is, if he's smart enough to be afraid, then why is he going to the party, right? So like, I don't see it, but, and look, the jealousy thing, again, like, there's a little bit more there because it's like, like she gains from making Achashverosh jealous of Haman. She doesn't gain from making Achashverosh fearful of her, because we know what happened to the last one. So like I'm challenging your view from a sort of plot development perspective. But if you like your answer, you like your answer. We're going to move on to step 4. Who would like to read step 4? Don't all be shy here. Go ahead. Thank you, Carol.
The second day, the king asked Esther at the wine feast, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to have the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Queen Esther replied, "If your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted me as my wish, and my people as my request." Exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent.
James Bond. Sorry, go on.
It's not worthy of the king's trouble. Thereupon King Ahasuerus demanded of Queen Esther, who is he and where is he
Mhm.
prepared to do this? The adversary and enemy, replied Esther, is this evil Haman.
All right. All right. So what does Esther actually ask for in chapter 7? So first, she's like, so first she's not going to ask the king. And then she's like, fine, I'm going to ask the king to come to a party. And then she asked the king to come to another party, right? We didn't give you that part, right? So like, there's really a stalling factor, right? We're building tension here. And now finally, she's making the request. And what is she actually asking for? Save me and my people in that order, right? Yes. Right. Well, and notice, right? So she doesn't actually say, right, who she is. Now, presumably, it's possible that Haman that the king, excuse me, understands from context. Or, look, it's also possible the king's like, I call for the extermination of a lot of people. Which one are you, right? So I don't know, right? So in chapter 7, she never actually says the Jews, she says me and my people. So and that Haman is the one who did it. So one way of understanding this is that that Ahasuerus is smart enough to understand, oh, what decrees have I done with Haman recently? Well, we laid off the Department of Forestry, and we said we were going to annihilate the Jews, right? Possible, right? Or, right? Or maybe there's so many that who knows which people we were talking about killing. You could be the Uzbeks, it could be the Tutsis, it could be we don't know, right? If Ahasuerus is smart, he's figured it out. I'm not willing to bet my rabbinate on Ahasuerus being smart. Right. Well, in the next chapter, she says that she is related to Mordecai. Right. In the next chapter, suddenly, right up until this point, the king does not know that she is Mordecai's niece. Right. They're like two independent players. So like at the end of chapter 7, it seems like maybe he knows that she's Jewish, but he definitely related to Mordecai because that only happens in the next chapter. And like, what do you make of the nature of the specific language of a request? How does that strike you? It is a strong request, is a weak request.
Emphatic, to the point, concise.
Emphatic, but well, I would say that she pulls her punch quite a bit. She's like, give, right? If you had only saved, that would have been almost as soon as she asks for it, we are on, like, well, save our lives. We don't need to save our stuff. Be slave, right? She's pulling her punch as soon as she says it. Well, I mean, yeah, so she says it's Haman. Notice the king saying earlier, the actually take revenge on Haman until Haman for his life with Esther, and the king sees him for her laying, and says, "Oh, he is jealous and he's going to get rid of." Right? He says, "Are you going to the queen in my?" So the king is motivated ultimately, right, not by any kind of desire to save the Jews, but just jealousy of Haman, right? He doesn't care about the Jews. Though, and this is where sort of betting on Achashverosh being smart, right? Because it seems like he doesn't actually care whether Esther is going to die so much as whether Haman wants to sleep with her, right? I mean, that seems right. It's not like he heard that Haman was going to kill his wife, and he like is in an uproar and we're going to kill that guy. It's like, well, after he thinks that Haman wants to sleep with her, that he like decides to get all stabby against Haman, right? So it seems like just the fact that Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, even if he figured out that Esther is a Jew, like that's not enough for him to kill Haman. Right. Right. Like it's what about me? All right. So we're going to go on. Now, by the way, if you were Esther, how would you have made this request differently? Right. Now, by the way, one of the things that I would note is that, the book of Esther, I think, was a very popular book, like sort of most of the books at the tail end of the Bible, right? Not many people know the story of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? The Song of Songs, it's some lovely, smutty love poetry. People can't quote it for you chapter and verse. I don't know what you would act out while you were reading it in synagogue, but we do on Passover, so you can come back and see what happens. Right, the end of the Bible after Psalms and Proverbs thins out pretty quickly, and Esther has this tremendous. It's a story that Jews know because of Purim, but also I think it is a story that for Jews in exile, right? That is the story of our experience, right? Our story is not the story of King David and conquest and leading our armies into war. Our story is the story of we are living under a capricious non-Jewish ruler, and we have to decide how we are going to navigate the intricacies, the vagaries, the shenanigans, even I would say, of court in order to protect ourselves and our interests against, enemies with all kinds of motivations. So in that sense, look, the story of having to appeal to a secular ruler for your own well-being is most of the story of the last several thousand years of Jewish history. And look, even with the establishment of the state of Israel, it is still how the game is being played to a great extent, right? So, I'm involved with AIPAC, which is an organization that I've been more or less enthusiastic about over the years, but in an environment where really the relationship between Israel and the U.S. is at risk, and Israel can't survive without America. Having an American government that looks favorably upon Israel is actually key to Jewish survival, and it's complicated, right? But developing those relationships, right? In some ways, it's still like 1788, right? It's still 1565 or 1656, actually, when the Jews are being let back into England. All right, so we're going to look at chapter 5 because we're going to. Sorry.
Whatever you want, even if half the kingdom, you can have it. He doesn't, you know.
Right. He doesn't pick up on, right. Right. Like, let me, Uganda, right? Give me one country, right? So the question, right? He says, I will give you up to half of my kingdom. So, right. So the question is, does he not mean it, right? Is one possibility, and she knows that. Or is it a test, right? I mean, I don't know how you're familiar with Eddie Murphy's stand-up routine. I want half, Eddie. All right. One person appreciated that reference. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for being with me on this journey. It's a thing about divorce, and is like, my wife's like, I want half. Right. Anyway, so like maybe, right, if she asks for half, he's gonna think that she is, going after his power. The rabbis kind of say, like, she's like, that he's only giving her half in the sense that I'm not giving you authority, right? There's a lot of ways of reading that. He said, Ad chatziyel malchut, I'll give you only up to 49.99%. I'm not giving you because it's not chatziyel malchut, it said ad chatziyel malchut, up until but not inclusive of half. So there's a whole discussion of, well, maybe he's saying, right, I will give you less than half of any kingdom. I'm not going to give you a whole kingdom. Do what you want with that. All right, so we're up to step 5. And does someone want to read us? Now we're looking at a different level of advocacy here. Anyone want to bring us home? Go ahead.
The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. If it please your majesty, she said, and if I have won your favor, and if it seems right to your majesty, and if I am pleasing to you, let dispatches be written, countermanding those which were written by Haman, son of Hammedatha of Agagite, embodying his plot to annihilate Jews throughout the king's provinces. Letters were written at Mordecai's dictation to the Jews and to the Satraps, the governors and officials of the 127 provinces from India to Media. He has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. Many people of province attacked them and destroy, massacre, and exterminate the armed force together with women and children. Plunder their possessions. Single day of all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of God.
Okay, so what is Esther asking for in step 5? What is her actual request here? And what does she get? This is just reading comprehension. This should not be the hard part. Maybe it is, I don't know. Right? To say, right, to undo the letters of Haman. So if you were going to undo the letters of Haman, what would that letter say? Scratch that, reverse it, right? Right? If you were going to countermand the letter, you would send a letter that would say, the command of Haman to destroy the Jews is now nullified, right? But Persian law, right, does not permit. So this is the trick, right? So Persian law does not allow you to just undo. There's no Control Z. Or see if you can close the door on. No, but the door next over. It's okay. It's fine. Just let it be. Let it be. Gary, let it be. Or see if you can close the next door over. So fun fact, we are trying to raise the money to actually fix these. If you are interested in being involved in that effort, let me know. Yeah, so see, it's a limited effectiveness there. All right, so it's not really right, we're not actually getting rid of the snake, we're buying a mongoose, right? Right? We're not actually getting rid of the mice, we're buying a cat, right? So it's not really an undo. And who is, now the other thing is, how does she portray the Jews as different from their enemies or worthy of saving? Right? So the initial request, right? Haman starts off by saying the Jews are not like any other people, right? This sounds familiar, right? Chapter 3. And so I don't know, what is she saying about Israel? What's the argument she's making for the Jews of why they are worth saving, if anything? I don't know, right? She doesn't actually say, it's funny, she never actually addresses, right? Haman says these people are different and don't follow your laws. What is the one thing we know about Esther, right? She doesn't follow the law. She goes in to see Achashverosh when she's not supposed to. So, and by the way, their language and their practices are different from everyone else in your kingdom. Notice she does not actually, right? She never actually challenges the, in a proclamations, there's whereas, and then therefore, right? So Haman's proclamation is, whereas the Jews are not like everyone else, whereas the Jews have their own language and their own whatever, and she never actually,
What did her, having read chapter 3, that she know said that?
I mean, I don't know. Look, the decree goes out. We don't know what's in the decree. Right. Right. We don't know what was in the decree. But it's just to kill all the Jews, right? But the point is, well, looking at the big picture, notice what she sends a message now at the end. This is step 6. Queen Esther sent, and notice now she's Avichail, right? Suddenly, like her full name comes back. And she wrote a Sukkot letter confirming the Purim letter that was sent previously, sends dispatches to all the Jews with words of equity and honesty. Don't worry, it's not diversity, equity, and honesty. It's just equity and honesty. These days of Purim shall be observed at their proper time, as Mordechai the Jew and now Queen Esther has obligated them to do. Right? So notice, right, we are now sending letters to the Jews specifically. Suddenly we have a different audience, right? The audience is not, so like the audience was the Jews to defend themselves, but then in level 5, level 6 is, by the way, don't just defend yourselves, but you actually have practices to follow. There's actually something about being Jewish, right? There's a celebration and so on. So like big picture, if you were going to place yourself in your journey of advocacy or of thinking about life, where would you put yourself in these steps, right? From not even admitting you're Jewish to telling the Jews what to do, right? Where do you find yourself in that list? Like, are you willing to stand up and admit you're Jewish, right? Are you willing to, do you develop relationships? Do you, sort of plead for mere survival? Or do you plead for victory? Or do you go beyond that and say, actually, I want to talk about why it is that we're Jewish in the first place, because we have a mission, we have a legacy, we have observances, we have a culture that we're trying to preserve. It's not just about preserving the body, it's preserving the soul. So as we read the book of Esther, yes, it's a story with a lot of drinking and grogging, but it is also a story of a woman's journey going from not even admitting she's Jewish to she is the leader of the Jewish people. She is the one who's telling everyone how to observe. That's quite a journey. She was the queen over the empire before.
How are you basically use it?
Right. Okay. If you have the power, you may as well use it. Sure. But what I want to point out to you is that, look, in chapter 2, when she is not telling you when she's Jewish, she's already the queen. Now, granted, she has not been the queen very long, right? But like her status legally, right, has not changed. Now, maybe there's a pivotal moment when she goes into the king and he raises his scepter. Okay, she knows that she's the king's favorite. She knows he's come to one party, he's come to two parties. Maybe she is more confident with the king. Like, definitely a possibility, but there's more going on here than that. All right, let me wish everyone a happy Purim. Anyone wants another bite to eat? And tonight services are at 6:30. If you know anyone who has not heard Megillah and wants to, we're doing it one last time at 6.